Alrighty, hi everybody. So thank you so much for being here for Independent Bookstore Day. I'm super excited to have Claire Holroyde and David W. Brown here with me. We have had just the most fantastic day. Thank you to everyone who has come out to support us, everyone who has supported us online. We just appreciate it so much. You guys have been super awesome. And I'm so excited to cap this great day off with this fantastic event. So I've got a couple of books that you guys have probably seen me shouting out on our social media. This is The Mission by David W. Brown, and then The Efforts by Claire Holroyde. And so basically what's super fun about today's event is their books speak to each other in such a fantastic way that I'm just going to have them speak to each other. So Claire has written a novel about the end of the world, and David has written a work of nonfiction about NASA's hunt to find us another one. So with that, I'm just going to let you guys talk. And if anybody has any questions, just leave them in the chat, and I will bring them up with the authors at the end of the event. So you guys have fun. I'll see you soon.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. That's fantastic. And happy Independent Bookstore Day, everyone. This is great. David actually reached out to me on Twitter and said that he had read my book. And I looked up his book, and it had starred trade reviews from everybody. New York Times, Scientific American, everyone was raving about it. And it was also, we both have books about space missions. So I immediately bought it, read it, loved it. And we decided to do an event together, which I was thrilled about. So I looked around. So David is a Louisiana native. Are you a native? You're currently there. Are you a native, David?
I am a native of Louisiana, yes.
Yes. So I started looking at bookstores, and I found Cavalier House Books, and they just like had such a grassroots customer base, and they just seemed so fun. It was a husband and wife team, and there was a picture of John, one of the owners, kind of cradling a book on the cover, and I just was like, okay, this is the bookstore for us. So that's kind of how this began. And so and I would love to start asking questions, but David, before I get into a question about your book, The Mission, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you to Cavalier House, of course, for having us. And I'm so excited that you got this thing going. So, yeah,
I was thrilled that you even allowed me to do this on your behalf. As I reached out to Cavalier, I'm like, I'm the extrovert of the pair. I'll do the talking. But so this is The Mission. This is David's book, and as you can see, this is the subtitle. And it is the best subtitle I think I have ever come across. And it is the plot of the book, which is fantastic. It's wonderful. But I want to, if you will also notice beyond the beautiful deckled edge pages, that it is 75 pages of endnotes and index. You did an incredible amount of research on this book. And it kind of blows my mind. And I know that you have an MFA in creative writing. How did you, and you are also a freelance writer, and you have so many articles about science and space missions in particular. How did you become an expert on space missions?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's also funny because in the sort of lead up to that question, half the things I'm going to ask you are directly related to that. So you're sending me a softball here. How did I get into writing or covering space? When I first started my career as a full-time writer, so I've been doing this full-time for almost 13 years now. I covered national security and politics. And if you've seen the news in the last 13 years, it's been pretty grim. So I found myself a couple of years into it hating to wake up in the morning and having to do my job. And I thought to myself, well, what do I like? Like, I'm a writer, I could do what I want. So what do I like? And I was like, I like space and I like robots. So I said, well, I'll write a book about space, or I'll start covering space robots. And that's what I did. So I was very fortunate early on. I was able to get some stories sold. And I started covering different events. Like the New Horizons flyby of Pluto was sort of the first big space event that I covered. I was at the Applied Physics Laboratory in Laurel, Maryland, and that was just sort of a life-changing experience, one of the great achievements of humankind. And I just absolutely loved my job, and I still do. I wake up in the morning just super excited about it. But over time, when you're new to a beat, you don't know anything, and at a certain point, you think you know a lot. And that actually led into when I started writing this book. After I sort of stumbled onto the story, I went into that first interview. So this was, I don't know, 7 years ago. I went into that first interview and feeling like I had a pretty good grip on things. And 1 minute into the interview, I realized, oh my God, I don't know anything about this subject. Like I've been laboring under a delusion. But that was also like a liberating moment, because I was able to approach the subject with a beginner's mind and not have any preconceived notions. I was able to avoid sort of cynicism in writing the book. And it turned out to be the best. Being totally ignorant of the subject turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. So that's sort of how I got into space. But from here, we'll see. Maybe I'll never work in this business again. We'll find out.
I don't know. It's fantastic. And do you think there is life on Europa?
Yes. If there's anywhere in the solar system beyond Earth that has life, it's almost certainly Europa.
Okay.
I want to sort of bat the question back at you, because I am very curious. So, or I just want to share the story of how I came to the effort. This was at the beginning of the year. I went to Barnes and Noble, as we did, or as we do in these dark times. And I saw your book was the first one I saw when I entered the store, and I was like, that looks like it's pretty good. And I looked at, I'm a sucker for the apocalypse, right? And I read the inside flap, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can get on board with this. So I picked it up, but I was also a little skeptical, because I actually knew a thing or two about what was in this book. And I thought, man, this could be great or it could be terrible. This could be one of the two. And it turned out to just blow me away. Your book is phenomenal. And I couldn't believe that you were a debut novelist. That actually kind of offended me, because you were way too good. You really should have been like on your third or fourth book, because this book feels so solid, and you achieve so many things that I did not expect. And you take the reader to places that I think that you don't necessarily. So if we're going to give it like the one sentence, right? An asteroid is inbound, or a comet is inbound. It may or may not wipe out all of humankind. We've got to fight back and protect ourselves. But of course you have NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, international space community, planetary science more broadly. You really did some incredible stuff, and I'm going to ask a little bit about that. But my first question, I'm curious, where was this book born? What is the origin story of this book?
It was probably the two, and thank you. It was probably the two missions that you get right from the start. There's the onset of the discovery of the comet. And so there's the first mission of, and that's the defense of Comet UD3. And that takes place in the spaceport in French Guiana. And so that was kind of like the first mission that I began to really develop. And then I see your blood orange signature drink. Thank you so much.
That's all you.
And then there was the second mission of saving the planet from a different kind of threat. And that was the expedition to the Arctic aboard U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy. And so that was the second mission, and they parallel each other, and they are different kind of doomsday clocks. One is basically within a year, the comet is going to be, they believe it will impact. Whereas things like species extinction and climate change and deforestation, that's a much longer doomsday clock. And I feel like we don't hear that one ticking as much. So I guess those two missions really were what started it for me. And just kind of, and then just, you know, definitely cosmic. I mean, space has always fascinated me, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Obviously it has to you as well. Understanding cosmic impacts, and what would happen if, you know, because we weren't around basically that when the first like major impact happened in the Yucatan. What would happen if we were, and what would that do to society to know that a comet was kind of inbound to impact Earth in less than a year?
How did you even come to sort of, I'm going to write a book about the apocalypse? How did you come to a comet and of course climate change, obviously? I'm curious, like in the very beginning, did you just say, I'm going to write a book about the end of the world? Or did you say, or did you just stumble onto it?
I think it, so it began, I guess, with the idea of cosmic collisions, and it wasn't actually a comet. It was Mars impacting the moon, and then impacting Earth. So it's actually like a very large planetary collide.
Right.
And it was kind of like a very dreamy, apocalyptic type thing. But I didn't go that route, and you will know that because you read the book. I didn't end up going. I was very much steeped in the time that I wrote this, which was 2016 to the end of 2019, and what was happening politically, what we were doing. Like I was very steeped in that moment of current events, and so it took a different turn. Mm-hmm. And there were different threats to be dealt with, and different, you know, politics to be handled. It very much changed because of the time in which I wrote it.
There's a certain timelessness to it that I noticed in the text. It didn't, because obviously, you know, we're still in the midst of obviously horrible, you know, or troublesome debates with respect to climate change, you know, globally, and when you read the book, it feels of the time politically, but at the same time, it feels like 30 years from now, if I read this book, it would not feel dated. In other words, I feel like you're addressing issues of society more broadly, and politics, and the way that's conducted. I think you're addressing them in a way that it's going to last. It's going to survive on people's bookshelves for a long time. People will be able to pull it back up and open up, you know, open that, or turn to that first page, and it won't feel like, you know, it was written in, this is a book that was clearly written in 2018. It won't feel like that. It's going to feel very fresh.
I hope so.
It's quite impressive.
Thank you. So both of our books had a lot of people in them, and they kind of created like an ecosystem and they had to explain of all the different parts, like they were all necessary to the mission and of that they were participating in. And you, in your acknowledgments, and I think you mentioned a couple minutes ago, you did interviews for 7 years. And I think you thanked people in your acknowledgments and said, you know, answering my questions for 7 years is a lot for anyone. But I mean, it wasn't even just answering questions. You really, I mean, they must have become your friends with the level of how much you knew them, and you treated them with such respect. And I'll give the example of where it really reached the height of being a personal level. Susan Nyber, who she was a person who had a Lego figurine that she had named the Princess Who Can Defend Herself. And she was an amazing character. Sorry, not character, she's a person. Sorry, fiction writer, who got her 4th cancer diagnosis. And she, in her extremely efficient way, was saying goodbye to her life, her family, writing her will, tying up loose ends. And you were there as a writer with her. She is writing a blog post to her 4-year-old son, and telling him that I'm living every day now for you. And you wrote You didn't even have to know her to feel devastated. A community this small, you felt everything. You lose someone like Susan, and the axis of the earth felt somehow to wobble slightly. How did you get to know this many people at such a personal level? I mean, you kind of became their biographer. How do you think that you did, how did you become so close to them and they trusted you pretty much with everything for 7 years? I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you very much. It took a long time to all right. So the way I write generally, not just for books, but for freelance and things like that, I feel very strongly that as a journalist, you have to go to the place, you have to meet the people, you have to go to the towns, you have to know what the dirt tastes like, right? And so it involves, a slow sort of methodical trust building and getting to know somebody. It's been so COVID's been devastating to me because obviously that's not been possible. So it's made writing the next book very difficult. But in the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism, I think, amongst the team, and rightfully so. Like, they had no idea what I was writing. They had no idea who I was. So it was a slow process, and it was I would approach these people. I befriended Louise Proctor early on. She was the first person that I became close with, and sort of the way that happened was, I called her and I said, look, I know you're super busy. I'd come across her name, and I said, if you could chat, I would be very appreciative. I didn't know what I was getting. She said, well, I've got 15 minutes tomorrow I can give you. So I called her the next day, and 3 hours into our 15-minute conversation, she was like, let's talk again tomorrow. And we did again the next day. We'd put hours. And one thing that I found with her, not just with her, but with everyone that I interviewed, literally everyone, they have been in the trenches so long trying to get this mission going. So for people who have not read the book, the book is about a team of scientists from across the country who came together or who worked together over multiple decades to build a mission, or to get NASA to approve a mission to a place called Europa, which is one of Jupiter's moons. It's an ocean world surrounded by an ice shell, and the ocean itself is incredibly hospitable to life. It's a liquid saltwater ocean. So, and by saltwater, I don't mean like green alien goo that is like a scientist's water, right? No, it's the same salt water in our ocean. You could take a sip of it. It would be very unhealthy, but
don't do that.
Right, but your body would know what to do with it. So, NASA doesn't have the budget that people think it has. It gets 0.5% of the federal budget, which is, like, compared to the Defense Department, it's like a rounding error in the Air Force budget or something. Yeah. What ended up happening was, it took them much longer than they thought to get this mission going. It was a sort of a no-brainer. Let's go to this place that probably has life, but you've got to get the entire planetary science community on board. You've got to get NASA headquarters on board. You've got to get the White House on board. You've got to get Congress on board. But the thing is, they all have to be on board at the same time, and everybody has their competing priorities. And if you're NASA and you don't have a lot of money, it's much easier to go to Mars. Like, let's just go to Mars because we can do that. And this Europa business, I don't know. So all of this is leading up to say that these people had been in the trenches for so long fighting to get this mission going, that when I started talking to them, it turned almost into therapy sometimes. Like, they'd never stopped and said, wow, look at all we've done. Look how far we've come. Like, this thing's finally going to happen. And so I think I was beneficiary of that, of being the first person to just say, hey, tell me about all this, tell me your life story. And when I wrote the book, one thing I endeavored to do was to make sure that even the villains in the story, and I think of them as characters too, incidentally, you call them characters.
The characters
the same way. I made sure that everybody was the hero of their own story. You know, in other words, everybody was acting in a very rational and methodical way, even when it was antithetical to getting the Europa mission going. It was still in service of some higher goal, whatever that goal might have been. And so the book was well received by them. And yes, we've become, you know, I think we've become great friends.
It felt like you were their trusted friend each time. I mean, there were many people, and each time there was just such a level of, you knew their past, you knew their thoughts, you knew everything about what they were doing at work, even like kind of sensitive stuff. You skirted the edge of certain things, but they trusted you wholeheartedly. It was. I mean, I think no one else could have written this book like you, except you.
Thank you.
You mentioned, speaking of books, you mentioned your second book, and I must call out your fantastic beard. You now look like an Antarctic explorer. Right. So can you, because you told me this story, but I would love for you to tell it again, because it's so great, how you got a way into Antarctica.
Okay, sure. Well, so my next book is about Antarctica, and a team of scientists who are doing kind of an amazing thing down there. The way, sort of the origin of that story, I knew that I wanted to write something about climate change. I knew that I wanted to write something about Antarctica because I still feel like it has that mystique. Nothing is mysterious anymore in this world. Like everything is very, you know, it's just the nature of, you know, being interconnected with everyone. Like when I was a kid, the notion of knowing someone in China, for example, was like, it was the equivalent of knowing someone from Mars. It was just impossible. And now, you know, our kids, you know, interact with people from other countries every day.
Shoot off an email.
And I'm sorry?
You just shoot off an email, you know?
Right, exactly. And that, you know, that wasn't a thing when I was young. But I feel like Antarctica still has that mystique. Like somehow it hasn't become boring. So I knew it'd be an interesting place to set, or to find sort of the story that I wanted to tell. This was several years into writing the mission. Okay. So what happened was there was one person on the mission that I hadn't spoken with yet. I'd sort of been putting off the interviews because I wasn't ready for it. Like when I talk to these people, like you don't talk to the most important Europa scientists in the world and say, well, so tell me about that ocean. Like you can find that elsewhere. You don't waste that guy's time. So this guy, his name was Don Blankenship. I hadn't spoken to him yet, and I was several years into the project, and I happened to be driving to Houston to the Lunar and Planetary Institute for a workshop, where two other people in the book, Louise, who I'd mentioned earlier, and Bob Pappalardo, who's the head of the Europa mission, they were going to be there together, and the idea was we were just going to get dinner and just chat, and they were going to bat memories around, and it was just going to be fun. It was just an excuse to drink, really. So I showed up to this workshop, and I drove, and it was like a 6-hour drive or something like that, and it started at 9 a.m. So I'd been on the road since like 3 or something. I was super tired, and I sort of pull up to LPI, and I go in, and there's a kitchen, and they have like donuts and all this. So it's an enormous like cafeteria style kitchen. There must have been, it feels like there were like 20 tables there. And I sit down with my donut, and all I want to do is eat it and drink coffee and just center myself after this. It felt like the Oregon Trail to get there. It's just the most boring drive in the world to Houston. And this guy walks in, and he gets a donut, and he's got this entire kitchen to himself, and he sits down right next to me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to say what I thought, but I thought, that's not cool. And he said, I know who you are. You're David Brown. I was like, yes, and I know who you are. You're Don Blankenship. And I apologized. Said, look, I know. He's like, you're the guy writing the book. I was like, yeah. And I was like, look, I know I should have spoken to you already, because he was a central player in the establishment of this mission.
That's how you got under the ice.
That's right. And the story is just rambling onwards, so I'm sorry. It's like
I love it. I mean,
stop. So after we talk, he's like, well, we end up just setting up an interview. Let me call you next week and we'll chat. And right before we parted, he said, so what are you going to work on next? You must be close to the end of this book. I said, well, I'd really like to write a book about Antarctica, but I don't know the guy you got to call to go to Antarctica. Like, you can't just book a flight. And he's like, yeah, that's some kind of problem. And that was all he said. And a week later, when we talked on the phone, you know, we spoke for like 2 hours. And at the end of the call, he said, hey, were you serious about wanting to go to Antarctica? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, you remember you said you didn't know the guy I need to talk to go to Antarctica? I'm the guy you need to talk to go to Antarctica. And, you know, a year later, I was on a plane heading to a Casey station on the East Coast of the continent. And yeah, it was a life-changing experience. I'm curious. I've got so many questions here, but I'm going to jump on this one because I feel like it's one you can really dig into. One of the things I admire most about this book is that, or about your book, is that you pit rationality versus irrationality. And when you discussed the sort of those two concurrent plots, I would say like on a micro level, you've got the effort, which is this international effort, sort of a coming together of scientists and engineers from around the world. We're going to develop this spacecraft, and we're going to take it to the comet. And you've also got society, exactly as you said. Like, how is society dealing with this? One is sort of the apex of rationality, I think, and one behaves exactly as I think society would behave, and it was a very, very dangerous tightrope that you walked, because it was very easy to fall into just complete and total cynicism, but you did not. And yet, this incredible theme emerged on how these sort of different, strata of the human psyche is going to deal with this, impending, devastating event. I'm curious about that. How much of that was intentional? When you were establishing the book's broader themes. I'm curious, did they emerge naturally during writing, or were they something that you sought out or you set out at the beginning to actually address?
I think, well, I knew with the polar icebreaker and the mission to the Arctic that I knew I wanted to talk about that environment because it is under threat. And so that was definitely from the beginning, I wanted to explore that. But it's hard to, people have asked me, like, did you have an outline or did you pants it, like by the seat of your pants? Mm-hmm. And I think I did kind of both. I had an understanding of how people would react, but I think you could see, and it was weird how it kind of, I saw it later with the pandemic after I already kind of wrapped up the book. You do see selfish behavior when people are threatened and frightened and they panic and there's looting, and then, you do have supply chains kind of break down. But even throughout that, you have these like small moments between people that I think can be very beautiful, and they're not necessarily related family. Like you could have strangers sometimes, or friendship. I think friendship is like an underrated relationship. It's a very beautiful, strong thing. Not necessarily reflected in nature with other species. I think there are some very beautiful moments between people that still happened in the pandemic and also in the book. Despite, the kind of mass panic. So I did kind of feel, it was both knowing certain areas that I wanted to hit, but also just feeling it. And researching, like, I tried to research Katrina, and like even small events where, things kind of went dark for a couple of days, like what happened in that darkness when there wasn't reportage coming out, when there wasn't power, there wasn't fresh water, like what happened? So it was kind of both. I kind of knew the points to hit, but also did some feeling around, and wanted one of the characters to kind of speak to me and what they would do and how how they would react and how they would like reach out and want, especially friendship. Like you still don't want to be alone in any situation like that. And I think that that's an endearing quality in people, that we want to not be alone, and we want to, even when it's dangerous, to reach out and try to connect, we still do it. Does that answer the question?
That absolutely does. And I want to follow up because another question I have here that dovetails exactly with what you just said. I'm curious. So you had both, you could say, the fortune or the misfortune to have your hypothesis tested in a real world situation, which in this case was, I mean, because you can research how people responded to Hurricane Katrina, and unless you were there, you know, it's impossible for someone to know what Katrina was like. I mean, we can read about it, but we can't really know. But everybody has suffered because of this pandemic. Everybody has experienced their own little miniature apocalypse. And of course, it was like an apocalypse after repeated mini almost apocalypses, apocalypsi, whatever the plural is, from the last administration, right? So I'm curious, was that an intimidating, like, were you like, oh man, I sure hope that this doesn't make my book look wrong, because that's a scary thing. Just for people who haven't read it, know that the book feels like it was written during the pandemic. Like, it feels like Claire took the feeling that we were all sort of been experiencing for the last year and compressed it into a book. She gave us a different way the world was going to end, but she did give us this world that we're living in right now. And it astonishes me. I mean, it is shocking to me that you wrote this book before the pandemic, because it anticipates so much when you look at it from that perspective. I'm curious, have readers approached you about that? Have they said, hey, this really spoke to me because XYZ?
Yes, and it's cut both ways. I've had readers who have said, even though I wouldn't have normally picked up a book like this, when I did, I couldn't put it down because it felt so relevant to what I'm feeling right now. But I've also seen posts of readers where they'll respond to book reviewers and they'll say, "This sounds great." Like, it's a character-driven apocalyptic story, which is not usually, especially with an ensemble cast this large. They thought they're like, this sounds very unique. This sounds like something I would be interested in, but I can't read it right now. And so I did see a lot of those. So I think it cut both ways. The fact that it was prescient to a catastrophic event that was different but felt similar. Yeah.
It's well done. That's all I can say. I couldn't get enough of it. I was very disappointed when the book was over because I needed more. I enjoyed it so much.
And same thing with yours. And I hear you had said that they even cut some of it, your book.
About 40%, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's wild. See, your research is fascinating, and like, you sound like a scientist. And I think anyone that didn't know that but the thing is, a scientist couldn't write like you. Like, that's what makes it so unique. It is so technically precise, but it's not. I wouldn't want to have read it if it were by a scientist. I wanted to read this by a creative nonfiction writer that got to know this incredible team of humans over 70 years. That's the book I wanted to write, and I got that book. And that's wild that there was 40% of it more that was cut. How I guess, as a writer, I was just curious. I'm like, how did you do this? The research must have been insane. Like, how did you keep track? And you were able to talk about it it's nonfiction. You had to be precise. How were you able to do that? Like, do you have software that keeps track of your research? I was just like, how?
I wish I did have software to keep track of the research. Actually, I did. I started with Evernote, right? Because it was like, it's going to keep track of everything because there's,
yes, there was so much in the back.
book.
Yeah.
And after about a month, I just forgot about Evernote, and it was just a disaster. Like how was the research? It was painful. That's how it was. One of the things I endeavored to do in the book, I wanted to make sure that the reader who came to this book didn't have to bring anything with them. You didn't have to know the difference between an asteroid and a black hole, and you should still be able to pick this book up and read it effortlessly. And the book also has a very breezy voice, so it's a funny
voice.
And it was intended to be like, it was supposed to be, when you're reading this book, it should feel like what it should feel like is a very old story. So for centuries, the Iliad or the Odyssey or whatever were not written down. They were just transmitted orally, and people would perform them for other people. People would memorize different sections of it and perform them, and then someone else would pick up and perform that part. And this book should read like somebody who's performing their part of this story, but can't quite remember all the details. Like, they're doing their best and they're barely keeping up, but they are keeping up. So that it should have like a breeziness to it, or a certain lyricism to it.
It does.
That was the goal. Yeah, playful is a perfect word to describe it. And it is so hard to write. Like, it's so hard to write something that feels like you're not writing something difficult. Like, it's so there are sections, like there's in chapter 1 that it used to be the beginning of chapter 9, but it got moved to chapter 1. It's sort of how the universe came to be. Like, so the book takes place from 3 seconds after the beginning of the universe till like 2015. But so that's like 3 pages long.
That's the most detailed description of the beginning of the universe I've ever read.
And it took 2 months to write, like 3 pages. And when you have to, when you're writing to a deadline, this as well as anyone. Like, when you're writing to, like, I have to hand this book in by whatever date, and suddenly you're mired in this one passage that just won't end. The research won't go fast enough. This is not coming. It's terrifying. And I found throughout the book, it never got, every time I wrote a chapter, I thought, thank God I'm done with this chapter, because the next one's going to be a breeze. And I get to the next one and it's just as hard. Every chapter was the hardest chapter in the book. And I think, so it was a real pressure cooker in my mind. And it was a rough experience. I can honestly say that I did the best I could do. Like, this is, if on my deathbed, I can say there's one thing I've done in my entire life that I could not have done any better. I'm not saying it couldn't be written better, but I'm saying it couldn't have been written better by me. And so 100% of me is on the page. But yeah, it was rough. In fact, the final 2 months of writing the book, I was working like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the day that I submitted it, it was New Year's Eve. We had dinner reservations, and I thought, I handed in the book and I'm like, let's go to dinner. And we ordered champagne, and within 5 minutes of uncorking the champagne, I could feel myself getting ill. And I think it's some part of my immune system had just been like holding things together just long enough to land the ship. Right. And I ended up being sick in bed for like 3 days after that. Like,
oh my gosh,
it was incredibly exhausting. So it was quite an effort to listen.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Book of mine, a great book that I'm a fan of. So anyway, how do you research something like that? Like, methodically, like slowly, and you just do the best that you can. I was making it up as I went. I've never written anything like that, and my next book is kind of the same way. I haven't learned the lesson to be more organized. So it's we'll I guess I'm going to be sick at the end of this one too. But I'm curious also about the research that you did. So when it comes to deflecting small bodies in our solar system, near Earth objects, or incoming, hyper velocity impactors, you actually the spacecraft that they build is in fact very similar to one that NASA's building right now. It's called DART, and it's going to launch next year. And I've covered that. I covered it for MIT Technology Review, and I'm writing about it for the New Yorker. And so I know about it. And the thing is, I figured that you talked to them because you basically invented their mission in your book.
I pulled from a real mission from Iowa State University. I think I think his name is Dr. Baum. I pulled from him, and I mentioned it in the acknowledgments. I'm like, the impactor idea. And for people who haven't read it, it's so you would have a spaceship that would have a nuclear explosive device inside, so that when it gets close enough to the comet, it would release the impactor ahead. The impactor would hit the side of the either asteroid or comet and excavate a hole. The rest of the ship would continue and then detonate its full charge. So it's like a 1-2 punch. And the impactor was that was an existing theory of how to deal with a foreign body like an asteroid or a comet. Who did DART? Who is behind that?
That's the Applied Physics Laboratory. They've been there won't be a nuclear weapon on it. It's actually a test case to see how much they can affect
the trajectory.
In this, right, exactly. In this case, it's a small asteroid, a near Earth object. But I'm curious more broadly. So your book covers a lot of ground in terms of science, and you very effectively convey this to the reader. You one of the things that I was most taken by with your book was how pleasurable it was to learn about these things, how pleasurable and how integrated they were, from the Arctic to outer space. What type of research did you do? Was it phone calls? Was it digging deep into science research? How did you do this? How? Tell me.
So I am not as interesting a writer as you are. I am a weekend warrior, and I would just read as much as I could. So the Arctic, I would look at video blogs, like video journals of people that were on Healy, because Healy is a real ship. People that went on Healy for the Arctic expedition. I would look at their research. There's also a middle grade book called To the Top of the World and Back by two scientists who had been on the expedition. They were oceanographers. So I read that. I saw the pictures. I looked at satellite imagery to see like where the ship would be and how much ice cover there would be at that time, and how much that had changed from the 10 years previous and then 10 years previous. Mm-hmm. For the Amazon, I read a book about, and I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly because they don't have an alphabet, the Waiapi. Mm-hmm. I read a book by Alan Campbell, who is a Scottish linguist who went to live with them he went in 1974 and again in 1982. And I had to read that book twice because it was written by a linguist for like the understanding of their language, but it was so amazing, but also just hard for me to get in my brain that I had to read it twice to be able to then write without thinking about it, write it down like it was kind of hardwired. I read a book called Blood and Earth about ecocide in the Amazon and just the politics. It's like the Wild West there. Like people get shot over resources. The environment is definitely endangered there. And also, I mean, I love reading, and my husband, he's a bigger reader than I am with publications. We get stacks of, New York Times, Financial Times, Economist, reading up about all of the relevant things about those locations. I would just kind of scour. And once people knew that I was writing about that, they would my mom's a fantastic article clipper.
Right.
And she would save me research into an envelope and give it to me. It was great. So just always reading up on whatever was relevant to those areas, and just being aware of politics and how that affects everything that we do. It was funny because I started writing this in mid 2016, and then after the election had to rewrite several parts because I had assumed a certain kind of competent leadership that I was like, well, what if we didn't have that? That would, like, what if we didn't have that and a major catastrophe happened? That would affect everything. And it did in the pandemic. I felt like we saw that. We saw that play out. And that's another factor of, catastrophe. So just reading all the time, publications, books, but also just firsthand experience because I couldn't do it. I wish, I know that your bio, you sound like the Dos Equis guy from the commercial, like the most interesting man in the world. I wish I could be this. I'm like, you are living the dream.
Feels like a nightmare.
He is an endurance runner, a former U.S. Army paratrooper, a veteran of Afghanistan, and has an MFA in creative writing. You also love wines. I was like, wow, I sound like a big gray blob. I am a graphic designer who has cats.
I have a cat too who's threatening to knock this camera over incidentally.
Okay.
but first of all, I am curious as a graphic designer. Did you have say in the cover?
So I had a say, but I did not have veto power. When I first, and actually there was an original cover that was completely different that my French publisher actually ended up taking. Because he's like, they don't want it, I'll take it. This one was actually it was first gray. And it was just that figure right there in the middle. And I said, okay, if you're going to use the sky, take advantage of that. Like the stars can be so beautiful. Like heighten the color, add color. I don't care if you add fake color. Like that's what NASA does when they have those columns of stars. Like they color them. I said just color it, and also make the middle kind of add some contrast. Like make it interesting. Like there's something on the ground that maybe it's the launch. Give some intrigue there. But the biggest thing is that it had a single person who was a man in the beginning. And I said, this is an ensemble cast. And honestly, like if you're going to pick a hero, it would be a woman, actually. We have a character who doesn't show up until the middle of the book, who she's the Deus Ex Machina, and she's an unlikely hero. You can't have just one man in the middle of a field. You need to show, and that is, I think, one of the best parts of the book is showing the collaboration that can happen between brilliant minds. I mean, human ingenuity is amazing. And I wanted that collaboration. So I think I wrote a list of things I didn't like about the cover, and she just sent them off to the designer, and they came back with a second one. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like, now we're in business. We can do this. Covers mean so much, and every little aspect speaks volumes that it's worth getting it right. Yeah.
You're so right. I'm curious. I lost my train of thought. It will come back to me, but it was related. Oh, yeah, I remember now. Okay, because as you were talking, I was thinking about sort of the psychology of graphic design. And I was curious, when you were writing this book, the sort of human psychology, was that the sort of thing you were just making up as you went? I mean, you intuited so much about society, but on small levels as well. The sort of the scenes, the intimacies felt, well, I mean, we've experienced in this pandemic. I'm not racing to cure the disease, right? I'm living my life and having, romantic problems or whatever. and so too do the characters in this book. So I am curious, how did you strike that balance? And I also wanted to say, this is just me being a big fan. The plotting in this book is brilliant, and it was like a cerebral Michael Crichton is the best way I can describe it. You know, you're an excellent writer, but you can't learn how to be good at plotting. Like, you just either you are or you aren't. And my God, if you are not just brilliant at it. So I'm curious, all of these things, how did they come together? And yeah, how'd you do it, basically? Maybe I can do it one day.
I don't know, and that's the worst answer ever. I know. I guess it's just always making you want to have that next footfall. Like, wherever you are, it's just like you want to wait for it, and it's hard to come up with how. It's hard to describe. I'm sorry. I don't know how to describe that. I guess the pacing, and that's one. You know, it's been classified as like all sorts of genres. Some people have, like, Barnes and Noble sometimes puts it in the thriller category. I think because of the pacing, and the scary nature of it.
Tell me about your writing process. I'm curious. You said you did this on the weekends, but I'm curious. What does a day of writing for you look like?
Definitely in the morning, getting a cup of coffee, going to like a quiet space, and just having that time, especially in the morning, because you're kind of fresh in a way that you aren't later on in the day. And I that time is just so precious that I found you need to know when you're good at writing and not let anyone else take that time. So it's definitely in the morning, getting a cup of coffee and just having that, either pen and paper or just like a Word doc open and feeling it out. I guess dialogue is something that definitely drives me in the story. I guess imagery, settings, not as, big picture, but I'm not actually someone who takes the time. I have to go back usually and describe and better the staging because I'm not interested in it in the first time. So I'm not a wordy writer. I am usually like sparse moments that build. I have to fill it in. I have to get the bones, and then I eventually begin to fill it in. I'm not one of those people that does like chapter 1 and then just goes through. Like I have to feel it out still. Yeah.
It was, the thing that struck me right away. Page 1, boom, it's coming. Like from the moment you begin this book, you feel almost a sense of anxiety. And it was very interesting to see. I mean, I think good drama is just taking characters and then putting them in a situation and then turning up the heat to see how they react, who breaks, who doesn't, who thrives, who is paralyzed. And you did exactly that. I mean, this is just textbook. This is the sort of thing that you teach in an MFA program. So I can't believe it's your first.
Oh.
You know what? Yeah.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Oh, Michelle's joined us. Hey, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm back. And I want to echo that. I felt the same way about the effort. I will never believe that this is Claire's first novel. Like, this is
Right?
just a new name that she's writing under, because there are at least 3 books under your belt. Like, there's no way this is a debut. It's fantastic. And your character work blows me away. So I have so enjoyed hearing you guys talk, and I wanted to kind of ask one more question of a connection that I kind of created between your books. So, of course, David, you name check Carl Sagan in your fantastic subtitle. And Claire, one of the things I was thinking as I read your novel is there's that famous line from Contact, where when Ellie is experiencing communicating with, aliens, she says they should have sent a poet to experience the beauty of it. And you did that. You sent a poet.
Yes.
And so I thought that was a really interesting character, to bring to a novel that is, about science. Like, and you also have a translator, and you show us so many different ways of looking at this. And I kind of wanted to ask if you could tell us a bit about why your cast of characters was so important, why that kind of very diverse group. It's not just the scientists who are working on the effort. It's, so many more individuals. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I've had some people very much enjoy that many characters, because it kind of fills in without going into. You get perspectives from so many different types of people that it fills in what is happening on like a grander scale, and also an international scale, where I wanted to get off not just people like me from North America, people from all over the world, and some inside civilization, some not. I thought it was important to kind of show a grander scale, and I guess it was also, I was thinking of it from like a media perspective, and I was almost writing it in the beginning, the early drafts, I was writing it like reportage from around the world with this happening. And it was almost like I would kind of zero in a certain area, tell that story, and then leave and go tell another one. And I know that some readers were remarked that it was very impressive and gave a full view. Others said, I felt there were too many characters. I like maybe no more than 3, because I like to really feel behind someone. So, it was, but I really wanted to give that grand scale. And I felt like David also did that with his, like he showed the full ecosystem. Like he even talked about one of the senator in the Appropriations Committee, because he was so integral to getting it passed, that he was part of their ecosystem, even though he wasn't a scientist at all. Like it was just everyone has a part of the puzzle, and you don't get the full picture unless you kind of tell all of their stories. Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, David, I felt like, to kind of bring my Carl Sagan around the corner, I felt like all of the characters in your work, again, characters, but they are humans, I felt like they all kind of were in Sagan's orbit in some way. Like, it felt like for everyone that you introduced, he was a colleague, well, obviously a colleague, but he was a professor or, was a mentor in some way. And I guess what I was wondering is, as, you met with people and talked with people, is it just kind of, if you're going to be in this world, you're going to interact with Sagan in some way, or even the legacy of Carl Sagan now?
I didn't anticipate that at all. That was just one of those happy accidents, and it became a recurring motif in the book, right? The Carl Sagan moment. I would never bring him up in interviews, but his name would always appear. Sometimes it was simply as an inspiration, like there's this guy on TV. I mean, he was the only planetary scientist that anybody knew for, well, he was an astronomer, but he was also a planetary scientist, and he was the most visible one on, for example, the Voyager missions, and of course Viking. But his name would come up again and again and again. And I just could not believe the impact that he'd left, the legacy that he had, and the impact he had on the field of planetary science, which itself was a very young field of science. When we talk about biology or chemistry or physics, I mean, these go back millennia. Planetary science goes back to the 50s, right? We couldn't have that field of science until we launched the first spacecraft in whatever year it was, 1956, I think. So there are a few people who have had enormous, almost outsized influence on the field. And it just so happens that in the field of planetary science has been people who are just legitimately good people, like people who are just, you don't go into this field to become a millionaire. You go in this, you go in this field because you have loftier aims for yourself and for humankind. And it was just such an inspiration to talk to these people and to get these stories.
That's really awesome. That's very cool to hear. So one thing that another very Sagan-esque thing is I feel like ultimately like your works are hopeful. And I wanted to kind of we had a question where someone asked, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to find it, but that's going to not work. But and I apologize if I get your question wrong, but basically the question was, the future does seem very grim, and often the Hollywood kind of perception of our future is not as grim. It's not as honest to what the data suggests, you know, is in our future. So what do you guys perceive, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask, as far as what's coming, what we can expect? Like, is, you know, from your work, both fictional and non-fictional, what do you see? And all the research you've both done as well.
Go for it, Claire.
It's never boring. I mean, you can always say that. I mean, times are fascinating and they're complex. They're never simple. I think that's what we will again see more of in the future. But I am a realist. Like, things can be sometimes grim, but there are always, like, even in the pandemic, I mean, babies were both still born. People fell in love. They dated still. They got married. Like, wonderful things still happen in dark times. And so no matter what, there are still opportunities for beautiful things, for friendship, for learning. Like, all of us here seem to and really love learning and science and enlightenment. There's always the chance of that. So it's never all dark, and it's never all light. Like, it's complex. So I would never say it's there will be a lot of both, and that can be an interesting thing. I mean, I think we can be excited about the future because it's always changing. So.
I would concur entirely with that. I think people are fundamentally good, but I think everybody's just doing the best that they can in hard situations, and particularly when these challenging situations emerge. Some people just come up short, and some people rise to the occasion. That's certainly something that I saw in the effort. It was very true to life. And, you know, I can even look at myself, like, you know, how have I carried myself since March of 2020? And there are areas where I absolutely failed, and there are some areas where I did okay. So I think, you know, take any one of us and multiply it times 7 billion, and you get sort of the cumulative story of the human experience. You know, what happens next? I guess it remains to be seen. I hope it's not a comet. That's
Me too. Me too.
I like that. And we'll all just hope for, you know, curiosity and teamwork, and then that'll get us through, right? So
Can I quickly thank you, Michelle, and Cavalier House Books. The pandemic has been a very difficult time to launch a book, as David will also tell you. And thank you so much for providing this opportunity. And I'm so excited to celebrate Indie Bookstore Day, because indie bookstores, you guys are the ones that help people find new talent. You know, it's not Amazon, it's you guys. It's you talking to your customers, your displays, your newsletters. Indie bookstores are helping us in a time that's very difficult. And I want everyone to help you in a time that's very difficult. So yeah, it's Cavalier House Books, and we've got links everywhere. Please help them, you know, buy. Books are wonderful things to buy. They make great gifts. And I just want to remind people what this looks like, because when award season comes up, I want everyone to give me the credit for knowing that this was going to be.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. But you know, there's plenty of room on the stage. They give separate awards for nonfiction and fiction. So,
there you go.
Nebula Award right here, John W. Campbell Award. I think it should be absolutely nominated for it.
I'll take it.
That's fantastic. And I will say these are both debut books, and we have signed copies, signed first printings, because, like, as you guys are saying, these are going to be the authors that we're watching. So thank you both so much for being here today. I so appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and the fantastic comments that were going on throughout. Like, y'all were so great. I love that everyone enjoyed this get together, and happy Independent Bookstore Day, everyone. And thank you to the authors of The Mission and the Effort.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this.